My name is Isabelle Carter. I'm 30 years old, a strategic consultant at a multinational firm based in Chicago. On paper, I've built what many would call a successful life, an impressive career, a stable income, and a well-appointed apartment in the city. But none of those things ever seemed to carry much weight in my family. In their eyes, success wasn't necessarily about what I achieved. It was about how available I remained for them, how much I was willing to give, how much I was willing to sacrifice. I grew up in a household where my parents, Richard and Helen Carter, quietly instilled one core belief: family always comes first, and children must make sacrifices for their parents. It was rarely spoken aloud, but it was baked into everything they did. My mother loved to say, "We've done everything for you, Isabelle. One day you'll understand that giving back is not optional. It's part of being family." For as long as I can remember, I've tried to live up to that silent contract. I was the dependable daughter, the one who never said no, the one who always showed up, the one who solved problems without waiting to be asked. My younger brother, Noah, never had to carry that burden. He was the easygoing one, the charming one, the golden boy in their eyes. He never worried about bills or expectations. Somehow, his lightness made him more lovable, at least to them. While I was building my career with back-to-back 14-hour days, Noah was backpacking through Europe, floating between hobbies and short-term jobs, eventually settling into a part-time role at a local radio station. My parents never asked him to help when expenses came up. They called me. One weekend, during a casual family lunch, my mother started talking wistfully about the idea of transforming our overgrown backyard into a beautiful garden. It would be so lovely to host your grandparents' 60th wedding anniversary there. She sighed, her eyes distant, her voice laced with longing. It's been so long since the family gathered for something special. A proper garden could bring everyone together. My father shook his head gently. "We just don't have the money for that. Helen, it's a nice dream, but it's not realistic right now." I watched my mother's face fall in quiet resignation. It was a familiar look, the same one I'd seen 100 times before when she put aside what she wanted for the sake of practicality. Something inside me clicked. "I can cover it," I heard myself say. "The whole thing. I want to do this for you." Her face lit up instantly, and my father, after a brief pause, offered a small smile of approval. In that moment, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, a spark of hope that maybe, finally, I was doing something that mattered to them. Maybe this time, I wouldn't just be useful. Maybe I would truly belong. I truly believed that funding the garden would finally earn me a place not as the dependable one, not as the problem solver, but as a daughter they could genuinely appreciate. That spark of hope carried me into the weeks that followed, and I threw myself into the project with an energy I hadn't felt in years. I was the sole point of contact with the landscaping company. I negotiated the contract, discussed every design revision, and coordinated directly with the project manager, Andrew. Balancing the garden renovation while handling a high-stakes client at work pushed me to my limits, but I didn't mind. I thought that this effort, this sacrifice, would finally mean something. I carved out time on weekends to meet with Andrew on site, approving materials, adjusting plans, and ensuring the project would be ready in time for my grandparents' anniversary. Each time I visited my parents' house, I found my mother and my aunt, Clara, her younger sister, sitting at the kitchen table with notebooks, papers, and swatches spread out before them. The first few times, they quickly packed everything away when I walked in, offering me polite but distant smiles. "Oh, just going over some little party details," my mother would say airily, as if it were nothing important. I didn't think much of it at first. I was busy, exhausted, and to be honest, a bit relieved that I wasn't being asked to handle the entire event planning. But as the weeks passed, the pattern became impossible to ignore. Every time I showed up, conversations stopped. My name would hover awkwardly in the air, followed by uneasy glances between my mother and Clara. When I casually asked about the guest list or the schedule, their answers were always vague. "We're still figuring it out. Nothing's finalized yet. You've got enough on your plate, darling. Let us handle the little things." What started as mild curiosity soon turned into a gnawing unease. One afternoon, I arrived unannounced to check on the stone delivery for the garden path and found Clara's car in the driveway. Through the kitchen window, I could see the two of them speaking in hushed tones, a stack of printed seating charts between them. When I knocked and walked in, they both startled as if I'd caught them in a lie. The papers disappeared into a folder so quickly it was almost comical. "Oh, hi, sweetie." Clara chirped a little too brightly. "We were just, you know, rearranging things." I smiled and played along, but something inside me tightened. As the garden began to take shape, a stunning stone terrace, elegant planters, a pergola draped in soft white fabric, my mother started requesting additional upgrades. She wanted custom lighting strung through the trees, specialized seating areas, imported flowers that bloomed just in time for the celebration. Each of these changes came with a price. The initial budget ballooned by nearly $2,000. I approved every single addition without hesitation. I told myself it didn't matter. If this made my mother happy, if this made the event more beautiful, if this secured my place in the story of our family, then it was worth every cent. I ignored the small voice whispering that perhaps they were taking advantage of my eagerness to please. I wanted so badly to be part of it that I silenced any doubts. My visits became more frequent as the project neared completion. Strangely, though, I felt less and less like I belonged. The kitchen became quieter when I entered. Even Noah, usually carefree and open, started acting distant when the party came up. One Sunday afternoon, I overheard him on the phone in the backyard, his voice low but urgent. "No, I know. She's almost here. Just make sure someone tells her soon." "Okay." When I stepped outside, he quickly ended the call and fumbled to change the subject. I didn't press him, though I should have. The garden was almost finished now, and the excitement in my mother's voice grew by the day. She spoke about the anniversary constantly, who was flying in, who was staying over, which caterer they'd finally chosen. But when I asked about the details, what time it would start, what I should wear, whether I could bring a +1, she waved me off. "You're working too hard. Isabelle, you don't need to worry about these things. Just focus on your job. We've got it handled." The way she brushed me aside left me unsettled. I had invested time, energy, and thousands of dollars into making this celebration perfect. Yet I felt like a bystander in my own story. The signs were there, flickering at the edges of my busy life, but I chose not to see them. I wanted to believe I finally belonged. I wanted to believe this was my chance to be more than the reliable daughter. I had no idea that, behind those closed doors, a different story was unfolding, one where I had no seat at the table. I should have trusted my instincts. The lingering silences, the careful deflections, the evasive answers, they weren't just signs of forgetfulness or disorganization. I had been deliberately kept at the margins of something I had poured my time, energy, and money into. But I didn't fully understand that until the morning Aunt Clara called. It was a Saturday. I remember it clearly because it was the first quiet morning I'd had in weeks. I was standing in my kitchen, slowly savoring my first cup of coffee, when my phone buzzed with her name flashing across the screen. I answered with a smile, still foolishly thinking I was part of the inner circle. "Hi, Aunt Clara?" I greeted warmly. "Everything okay?" "Oh, yes, sweetie," she chirped, her voice casual and light. "I just wanted to double-check something for the guest list. Your mother said you wouldn't be bringing anyone to the party." I blinked in confusion. No, I wasn't planning to bring a +1. But wait, what guest list? The anniversary party. She hesitated for a fraction of a second. Well, no. The intimate family dinner in the new garden, next Saturday. A strange coldness settled in my chest. What do you mean by intimate family dinner? You know, just the immediate family. Your parents, Noah, me and Uncle George, and your grandparents from your dad's side. My pulse quickened. I thought next Saturday was the anniversary celebration. The whole family's coming in for that. Right? That's what the garden was for. Aunt Clara paused again, this time longer, as if carefully choosing her words. Oh, honey, the big reunion is actually scheduled for September at the resort. This is just a small family dinner to celebrate the anniversary on the actual date. I felt my grip tighten around the mug. So, I'm not invited to this dinner? Well, she stammered, your mother mentioned how busy you've been, and she thought it might be too much for you to attend both events, especially since you've done so much already with the garden. Something inside me shattered. I steadied my voice, though my heart pounded in my ears. Let me get this straight. I've paid for the entire garden renovation so you all can have a family dinner. I'm not invited to. Oh, Isabelle, please don't put it like that. It sounds terrible when you say it that way. Of course we appreciate everything you've done. How long have you known I wasn't invited? I cut her off. She hesitated again. Since they started planning it, a few months ago, I suppose. Months. They had known for months, even before I offered to pay. Even before I saw the first blueprint or signed the first contract, I realized, with sickening clarity, that they had allowed me to invest my time, my money, and my hope into something I was never meant to be part of. I ended the call abruptly. I don't remember what excuse I gave her, something about needing to check on something in the oven. I set the phone down on the counter and just stood there, staring blankly at the tiled floor. For several minutes, I couldn't move. I couldn't even think properly. Waves of realization crashed over me, each one heavier than the last. Every vague answer, every seating chart they had hidden, every awkward silence now made perfect, cruel sense. I called my mother immediately. No answer. I called my father. Straight to voicemail. My hands trembled as I typed out a text to both of them. Just spoke with Aunt Clara. Is it true I'm not invited to the dinner in the garden I paid for? The response came 20 minutes later. It was from my father. Don't be dramatic. It's just a small family dinner. We'll all celebrate together in September. Don't be dramatic. Those 3 words gutted me more than I expected. They weren't just dismissive. They reduced everything. I felt betrayal, exclusion, humiliation to an overreaction. I wasn't even worthy of acknowledgement. In a daze, I opened social media and scrolled through Aunt Clara's latest posts. There it was, a cheerful update about the upcoming private family celebration, tagging not just my parents, but Noah, his girlfriend, Uncle George, and cousins I hadn't seen in years. I wasn't mentioned. I wasn't invited. So it wasn't just a small dinner. It wasn't even about keeping things simple. They had invited extended family, distant relatives, and even neighbors. Everyone but me. I felt my chest tighten as the truth finally settled like lead in my stomach. I wasn't part of their version of family. I was a wallet, a solution, a convenience, but never a seat at the table. I sank to the floor of my kitchen, my back pressed against the cabinet door. And for the first time in years, I cried without stopping myself. The sobs came hard and raw, erupting from the deepest part of me, the part that had spent my entire adult life chasing their approval. I cried for the years I'd spent giving, for the vacations I had postponed, for the silence I had swallowed. I cried because I had finally run out of reasons to defend them. But somewhere inside that flood of grief, something else stirred, a quiet, steady resolve. This would not be another moment I buried. This time, I would not let it go. The sobs eventually subsided, but the resolve that had surfaced in their place remained. I sat there on the cold kitchen floor, realizing with painful clarity that I was done being the agreeable daughter who always absorbed the blows, who always quietly made things easier for everyone else. I would not let this betrayal pass as just another chapter in the long story of their taking me for granted. I got up, washed my face, and sat down at my desk. My first step was to review the financial agreements. Every contract, every payment authorization, every deposit I had signed, them all in my own name. The landscaping company, the subcontractors for the custom lighting and specialty irrigation systems, even the maintenance plan, all tied legally to me. They had let me handle the paperwork, trusting that I would just continue to pay, continue to give, without question. But I wasn't that girl anymore. I pulled up the project files, invoices, and payment schedules. I realized there were still outstanding balances specifically. The final subcontractor payments totaling around $2,800, plus the $700 remaining in the prepaid maintenance fund I had set aside to keep the garden pristine through the summer and fall. I had a choice. And this time, I wasn't going to make the choice that protected their comfort at the expense of my dignity. I picked up the phone and called Andrew, the project manager from the landscaping company. His voice was warm and familiar when he answered. "Isabelle, how's everything? Are you enjoying the final look?" "The garden is beautiful," I said, my tone even. "The work has been perfect. This isn't about that. I need to talk to you about the remaining payments." There was a pause. "Is something wrong?" "Not with the project," I clarified. "But I've had a change in circumstances regarding the event. I'd like to cancel the pending payments to the remaining subcontractors and freeze the maintenance fund. I understand that the final work is complete, but I no longer wish to release the remaining balance." Andrew sounded cautious. "That's unusual. Can I ask why it's a personal family issue?" I said, "Nothing to do with your company's work. I simply can't continue the financial commitment under these circumstances." After a moment, he agreed that it was within my rights as the signing party. I would need to send formal instructions via email to confirm the cancellation and the freezing of the account. I promised I would do it immediately. When I hung up, I drafted the email carefully, making sure there was no room for ambiguity. Within minutes, it was sent. Then I sent a text to my parents. "I've canceled the remaining contractor payments and frozen the maintenance fund. Since I'm not considered part of the family for this dinner, I don't see any reason to continue supporting it financially. We can talk when you're ready to have an honest conversation." I stared at the message for a few seconds, then pressed send. My finger trembled briefly, but I didn't allow myself to regret it. This was the first real boundary I had ever set with them. What followed was exactly the chaos I expected. The first calls came from my mother. I didn't answer. They multiplied 5 calls in the next 10 minutes. Then came the messages, "Isabelle, answer your phone now. What are you doing? You can't just pull out like this. This is your grandparents' celebration. Don't make this worse." When I didn't respond, the messages from my father started, harsher, colder. "You've crossed a line. The contractors are threatening liens on the house. This is unacceptable. Fix this now." Then Aunt Clara joined the chorus, pleading in her familiar soft tone. "Sweetheart, I'm sure there's been a misunderstanding. Please, don't make this into a bigger issue. Let's talk this through calmly. You've always been the reasonable one." That last message made me pause. I had always been the reasonable one, the one who smoothed things over, who swallowed her hurt for the sake of peace. But I was done carrying that role. By the end of the day, the number of missed calls was staggering. My parents were in full panic. They couldn't imagine a world where I didn't quietly comply. When they finally showed up at my apartment that evening, I wasn't surprised. I heard the knocking, first sharp, hurried. Then my mother's voice, tight with urgency. "Isabelle, open this door right now. We need to talk about what you've done." I opened the door slowly, meeting her furious gaze. My father stood behind her, his arms crossed, his expression unreadable but tense. "Let's talk inside," I said calmly, stepping aside to let them in. As soon as the door closed, my mother's voice exploded. "How could you do this to us? The contractors are threatening legal action. You've embarrassed us in front of the whole family. I made a decision," I said, my voice steady, based on the new information I received. What information my father snapped? That I wasn't invited to the family dinner in the garden I paid for. I answered quietly, "It's just a small dinner." My mother sputtered, "It's not the main event." "That's not how you presented it when I offered to fund the renovation," I said, holding her gaze. "You led me to believe I was part of it. You accepted thousands of dollars from me under that assumption. You're blowing this out of proportion." I shook my head. "No. I'm finally putting this in proportion. I'm not your bank. I'm your daughter, and I deserve to be treated like one." My words hung in the air, heavier than I had expected, and for the first time in my life, neither of my parents had a ready answer. My mother's lips parted in shock, her eyes darting to my father as if waiting for him to take charge, to scold me, to restore the old rhythm where I apologized first. But that moment never came. Instead, we stood in a tense, echoing silence until a knock at the door interrupted us. It was Noah. I wasn't surprised he had come. I could see the hesitation in his posture as I opened the door, the way he avoided my mother's gaze and the uncertainty flickering across his face. "I thought I should be here," he said simply, stepping inside. My mother, seeing him as an ally, immediately turned toward him. "Noah, please help me make your sister see how unreasonable she's being." But Noah didn't rush to her side. He looked at me instead. Something passed between us, a quiet recognition, an unspoken apology for all the years he had stayed silent. "Actually," he said carefully, "I've been thinking a lot about this." His voice was steadier than I expected. "Mom, Dad, I've known for a long time that Isabelle has been treated unfairly. I've known. But I didn't say anything because it was easier to stay quiet." His words sliced through the room like fresh air in a suffocating space. My mother blinked in disbelief. "Noah, what are you saying I'm saying?" He continued, "That I've seen her carry the family's burdens for years. Every time something went wrong, you called Isabelle. Every time you needed help, she was the one who stepped in. And none of us ever really thanked her for it. We just expected it." My father's jaw tightened. "This isn't the time to bring up old grievances." "It's exactly the time," I said, my voice low but firm. "This is the pattern. You ask. I give. You expect. I deliver. And when it comes to something that matters, something that isn't a crisis, something joyful, I'm excluded." My father narrowed his eyes. "So what do you want?" "Isabelle, you want us to apologize. You want us to pay you back." "No," I said, looking directly at him. "I don't want repayment. I want to be seen. I want to be treated like a daughter, not like an emergency fund. I want my contributions to be acknowledged, not assumed." My mother crossed her arms defensively. "We've always appreciated what you've done for us." "Have you?" I asked softly. "Because all I've heard from you since I canceled those payments is how I've embarrassed you, how I've made a mess. Not once have you asked why I felt the need to do it." They both fell silent. "I'm not asking for grand gestures," I said. "I'm asking for the smallest, most basic thing to be included. To not be treated like an outsider in my own family." Noah shifted in his seat and added, "She's right. You've treated me like I can do no wrong, even when I've failed. And you've treated Isabelle like she can do no right, even when she's carried all of us." The weight of his words settled heavily over the room. "You always said Isabelle was the strong one, the reliable one," Noah continued, his voice tightening. "But you never stopped to think that maybe she needed support, too." My mother looked down at her hands, her throat bobbing as she swallowed. My father glanced between the three of us, as if recalculating his position in this unfamiliar dynamic. "We have a practical problem now," my father said after a long pause, "defaulting to logistics. The contractors need to be paid. The remaining balance is nearly $3,000. I nodded. "You can pay that yourselves. I've already contributed over $8,000. I was planning a vacation with that money before I offered to help with the garden. I've done more than enough." My mother's face contorted with protest. You know we can't come up with that kind of money so suddenly. I did. I said quietly. You can. Noah's gaze flicked between us. Or you can postpone the dinner. Or you can include Isabelle. That's how you solve this. My mother opened her mouth to argue, but my father, ever pragmatic, raised a hand to stop her. That's fair, he said simply. We should have been upfront about the guest list from the beginning. I'll figure out the payment. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't a sweeping declaration of understanding. But it was a beginning. We'll revisit the dinner plans, he added. No final decisions yet, but we'll talk about it as a family. As a family, it was the first time in a long while that he'd used those words in a way that felt like I might actually be part of it. My mother still looked rigid, unsettled, as if the ground had shifted beneath her and she hadn't yet decided whether to stand or retreat, but she said nothing more. Noah moved to sit beside me, his quiet presence a lifeline I didn't know I needed. His support wasn't loud, but it was enough to keep me steady. I'd never seen my parents so visibly shaken not by anger, but by the slow realization that I wouldn't step back into my old role this time. I had drawn the line, and they had finally been forced to hear me. The shift didn't happen all at once. After that night, the night I drew a boundary they couldn't ignore, there was a long silence. Days passed without a word from my parents. I half expected them to retreat into stubborn distance, to wait until I reached for them first, as I always had. But I didn't. When they did reach out, it wasn't with anger. It wasn't even with pressure. My father texted first, asking if I could come by to discuss the payment arrangements calmly. I agreed, but this time I went on my own terms. When I arrived at their house, the garden was in full bloom, the space I had built for them standing there beautiful, complete, and suddenly, entirely mine in a way I hadn't understood before. My father greeted me with an awkward nod, my mother with restrained glances, but the conversation that followed was not like the ones we'd had before. My father admitted, in his way, that they had been unfair, that they had made assumptions about me, assumptions I had allowed for too long. He didn't offer grand apologies, but he acknowledged that the dinner would be postponed, the celebration reframed. This time, I was not just welcome, I was expected. For my mother, it took longer. She still stumbled over the idea that I could set limits, that I could choose when to give and when not to. But something softened in her too. She began to call, not to ask for favors, but to genuinely ask how I was doing. It was a quiet shift, but I felt it. In the months that followed, the family dinner was rescheduled as part of the larger reunion. I was involved in the planning not as a financial backer, but as a member of the family. The night of the celebration arrived with clear skies, the garden glowing under the soft string lights I had chosen so carefully months earlier. I didn't stand in the background. When my father raised his glass that evening and thanked me in front of everyone, if not for Isabelle, this garden would not have been possible. I accepted his words, but I no longer needed them. His recognition was a nice gesture, but it no longer defined me. What mattered was that I had finally seen myself. Noah and I grew closer through all of it. Our conversations shifted from shallow updates to real, honest exchanges. He, too, was learning to step out of the roles our parents had written for us. He thanked me more than once not for the garden, but for forcing a reckoning neither of us knew we needed. My mother's calls became more frequent, more sincere. She began to ask about my life without pivoting to her own needs. She sent recipes she thought I might like, told me small stories about her day. They were subtle efforts, but I noticed them. Eventually, I used the money I had planned to spend on the garden's maintenance for something else, something I had delayed for far too long. I booked the trip to Spain I had once shelved, not as an escape, but as a deliberate step toward choosing myself. I stood in the airport terminal a few weeks later, suitcase by my side, boarding pass in hand. Nay. The gate attendant called for boarding, and I moved forward not with the weight of old expectations, but with something lighter, steadier. I realized, finally, that my worth was never something my family could give me or take away. It had always been mine. Some doors don't need to be slammed shut. Some doors simply close behind you as you walk forward, calmly, without apology. Because true worth never requires permission, and dignity once claimed cannot be taken.